Good evening, everyone. This week's Parsha is Parshas Devarim, Tafshin Pei Daled. And before we begin, I just want to let everybody know that this will be the last Tuesday night Parsha class for a couple of weeks. Next Tuesday is Tisha B'Av. There will not be a Parsha class on Tuesday evening, but we will be live streaming the reciting of the Kinnis that we say on Tisha B'Av morning at 9 a.m., which is accompanied by I elaborate and discuss the kinnis that we recite. So that will be on next Tuesday at 9 a.m. And then we will again break from the class for a couple of weeks over the summer, and we will resume Mitzvah Hashem sometime in September. Okay, so this week's Parsha is Devarim. We're going to start from the beginning of the Parsha, Perek Aleph, Pasuk Aleph, chapter 1, verse 1. Elah HaDevarim, these are the words. Asher Dibra Moshe al Kol Yisrael, that Moshe spoke to all of Israel. Be'evra HaYarden, on the other side of the Jordan, meaning not the Israel side of the Jordan, but the other side, the eastern side of the Jordan, which is where the Jewish people were. So that's where they were camped right now. So if you read these words, these are the words that Moshe spoke in Eivra HaYarden, on the other side of the Jordan, which is where they were. Then it says, Ba'midbar, in the desert, Ba'arava, in the plain, Molsuf, opposite the Red Sea, Bein Paran and Bein Tofel, between Paran and between Tofel, Lavan v'Chatzeros v'Dizahav, and Lavan, Chatzeros, and Dizahav. Now, all these, just from reading the verse, the pasuk, they're all names of places. And if you read the pasuk as is, it sounds like these are the words that Moshe spoke on the other side of the Jordan, in the desert, in the plain, opposite the Red Sea, between Paran and between Tofel, and Lavan and Chatzeres and Dizahav. There's a Yiddish saying, Mekenish tanzen abeit av tzvei chasanas. You can't dance at two weddings at the same time. If Moshe Rabbeinu is in the Eivra HaYarden, he's on the other side of the Jordan. Is he in the desert? No. Is he opposite to Suf? Is he opposite the Red Sea? No. Is he between Paran and between Tofel? No. So where was he? How could he be speaking all these words at all these different places? Okay. Now Rashi has his comment on that, and I'm going to share with you this evening the comment of the Malbim. But first, we need to read a few more verses. 11 days from Chorev, Derech Har Seir ad Kadesh Barnea, the way of Har Seir until Kadesh Barnea. Vahi bar b'ayim Mishana, and it was in the 40th year, B'ashtei asar Chodesh b'echad Chodesh, the 11th month on the first of the month. Divrei Moshe b'nei Yisrael, Moshe spoke to the children of Israel, K'chol asher tziva Hashem b'Yisai aleihem, according to all that Hashem commanded him to them. So he spoke to he said to the Jewish people all that Hashem commanded him regarding to them. Okay. When did he do this? After he smote Sichon, the king of the Amorites, who lived in a place called Cheshbon, and after smiting Og, the king of Bashan, who lived in a place called Ashtarois in Edrei. On the other side of the Jordan, in the land of Moab, Moshe began to explain this Torah saying. Okay? And then Moshe basically goes into talking about the Jewish people are going to enter the land of Israel. He then goes back to the episode of when they appointed judges, and then Moshe goes into a review of the sin of the spies. Okay, that's just a little bit what happens in the parsha afterwards. So let's get back now to the beginning, where we're trying to figure out what does this first pasuk mean, and how does it fit together with everything else that we say that in the 40th year Moshe began to speak to the Jewish people, whatever all that Hashem told him to say to them after killing Sichon. And again, mentioning on the other side of the Jordan, Moshe began to explain this Torah. How do we put this all together? So the Malbim explains like this. The Malbim says that we have to look we need a kind of general introduction to the book of Devarim. And the first thing he says is like this. The first 6 psukim of the Parsha are introductory verses. They're an introduction. Starting from Pasuk Vav, verse 6, in this chapter, until chapter 12. Okay? Until chapter 12. What will Moshe be speaking to the Jewish people about? What will that section of Devarim be about? That section will be about Moshe rebuking the Jewish people for their past sins, reminding them to never forget all the good things that Hashem did for them, taking them out of Egypt, taking them through the desert. Again, reminding them and rebuking them for their sins, exhorting them that they should fear God, love God, to remember the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. These first 12 chapters are all where Moshe is teaching the Jewish people. He is rebuking them. He's inspiring them. He's getting them. This is his I guess we can call it his ethical will. This Moshe Rabbeinu is about to die, and this is where Moshe tells them about how they need to live their lives when they enter the land of Israel. And he does that by reviewing the past sins and reminding them of all the important messages of remembering Hashem's goodness, fearing Him, loving Hashem, remembering the giving of the Torah at Har Sinai. Those are the first 12 chapters. In those first 12 chapters, there are some mitzvahs not mentioned previously that are sprinkled in there. And then, starting from chapter 12 until chapter 27, is where Moshe Rabbeinu teaches the Jewish people mitzvahs. Many mitzvahs that are not mentioned in the first 4 books of the Torah, plus addition to mitzvahs that were already said before. And then after that, you have Moshe's life ending. After about a month's time of speaking to the Jewish people, there is the end of his life. What happens at the end of his life? Okay, I mean, this is all happening at the end of his life, but that's like right before the end of his life. So you've got one section of Moshe's rebuke and inspiration to the people, and you have another section of where Moshe is either teaching mitzvahs not mentioned previously or adding more detail to previously mentioned mitzvahs. So says the Malbim, there is a question that the commentaries ask when it comes to the book of Devarim. And they ask, is the book of Devarim from Hashem, like the first 4 books? The first 4 books, we say, Hashem told Moshe, what to say and what to write eventually. Or do we say that Moshe is actually, the book of Devarim is Moshe speaking on his own? This is Moshe. This is coming from Moshe. It's coming from within him. These are his words, his final words in the last month of his life to the Jewish people. And they're all recorded in this book of Devarim. Now, what makes us say that? What makes us say that book of Devarim should be different than the other books? So, the first thing that the Rambam mentions is the Gemara, the Talmud in Maseches Megillah. The Talmud in Maseches and Tractate Megillah says the following. There's a section of the Torah that we call the Tochacha, the rebuke, where Moshe warns the Jewish people that if they abandon the Torah as a people, that terrible suffering will come upon them. Remember that? You've got that at the end of Vayikra, and you have it towards the end of the book of Sefer Devarim, the book of Devarim, in Parshas Kisavli. That's towards the end. Now, how many Aliyahs on Shabbos do we have? When we call up people to the Torah on Shabbos, how many people do we call up? 7. Plus, the 8th one, who we repeat the end, the maftir. Okay, 7. What if you have a bar mitzvah, right? And you have 15 guests, and you want to give every one of them an Aliyah? Can you do that? We don't do that here. But halachically, you can do it.
Yom Kippur can have many people.
Who?
In Yom Kippur.
Why, Yom Kippur we never add?
No, ask people, all people come to talk to the Torah.
What do you mean? I'm talking about when we read the Torah.
When we start reading again and again until everyone.
That's Simchas Torah.
Simchas Torah, yeah.
Right.
Simchas Torah.
There we're repeating the whole parsha
Yeah.
over and over again.
Simchas Torah,
Right.
sorry.
Repeating the parsha over and over again. Yeah, that's true. But I'm saying on a regular Shabbos, can you give more than 7 aliyahs? The halach is yes, you can. We don't do that here generally. We don't do that here.
Not repeating, but
Dividing more, right.
Exactly.
Instead of being divided into 7 parts, you divide it into whatever.
Okay.
Now, the halacha is there's a minimum amount of verses that you need per aliyah. You can't make one verse an aliyah. You have to have at least 3 verses for an aliyah. And there may be other details too. Okay, that's one thing I'm mentioning. All right, but you can add aliyahs. You can add, there's one part in the Torah, there's one portion of the Torah that you cannot break it up. It has to be read as one section, one unit, and there's no breaking it up. Other parts of the Torah, any other part of the Torah, you could break it up. You want to break up the first chapter of Bereshis into more than one aliyah? Go ahead. But there's one section of the Torah that you have to read it as one unit. You can't break it up, and that is the Tochacha. The section where the Torah talks about all the terrible suffering that will come upon the Jewish people for abandoning the Torah. We don't break that up. We read it and finished. No interrupting it, no deciding to spread it amongst more people. You read it just as one unit, and that's it.
One person.
One person. No breaking it up. However, the Gemara says, that is only true regarding the Tochacha, the rebuke in the book of Devarim. In the book of Vayikra. In Parshat Bechukos at the end of Vayikra. But the Tochacha in Parshat Kisavai, that you could break up. Why? It's the same rebuke. The answer is, says the Gemara, listen to these words. The Tochacha in Vayikra is mipi hagavura, is from the mouth of God. The book, the Tochacha in Devarim and Kisavo, Moshe Amram. Moshe said them.
This in what is it, Gemara?
Yeah, that's the wording of the Gemara. The Gemara says Moshe said them.
It means there's no question.
Sounds like no question, right?
Yeah.
Excuse me. Sounds like no question. Sounds like the Talmud says Moshe said it.
Okay.
So it's not only going on that section of Devarim, it means the whole book of Devarim would be Moshe saying it. But says the Malbim, there's a big problem with that. Big problem. Because there's a different section of the Talmud in Sanhedrin that says that if a person were to say, if a person says, I don't know, Chas v'shalom, a person says, this didn't come from God. It was, a couple of different people decided to write up different things and it became part of the Jewish religion, but it doesn't come from God. What do we say about that person? We call him an apikaris. We call him a heretic. Ki devar Hashem baza. He has disgraced the word of Hashem. But that's not only about if a person denies the whole thing. Let's say he says every verse in the Torah comes from Hashem except for one. Just one. There was one verse that Moshe decided he's putting that one in. Same thing. That is included in Devar Hashem Baza. That is included in disgracing the word of Hashem. He's an apikaris.
This is also from Gemara?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So we have a problem, right? We have a problem then. Because one Gemara says, this is from Moshe. Another Gemara says, if it's the Torah, you have to believe it comes from God. And, even more difficult would be that if this book came from Moshe, if the book of Devarim came from Moshe, well, as I mentioned before, there are mitzvahs that are not mentioned previously in the Torah, but are only mentioned here in the book of Devarim. So what are we going to say then? Moshe made up those mitzvahs? That's what we're going to say? That can't be. Now, to come back to the other way, okay, all right, so you know what? All right, so we have a problem, right? So now we have a contradiction in the Talmud, okay? On the other hand, the style of the book of Devarim is very different than the style of the rest of the Torah. The first 4 books of the Torah are what we call a narrative. It's like someone is telling us what happened, right? Hashem told Abraham, leave your father's house. Hashem told Moshe, go up on Mount Sinai. The Jewish people traveled in the desert, right? It's a narrative. It's written in a way that someone is telling us a story. That's how it's written. This Sefer Devarim, the 5th book of the Torah, the wording of the Torah is Moshe's talking. We have an introduction, and then Moshe starts talking, and he doesn't stop. He doesn't stop talking. It is all Moshe talking. And another thing he points out is when it comes again to the mitzvahs mentioned in the book of Devarim, anytime previously in the Torah, when a mitzvah is given to the Jewish people, what does the Torah say? Hashem said to Moshe to say. In some form or another like that. Doesn't say that here by the mitzvahs. By any of the mitzvahs that it says later on, you're not going to find that Hashem said to Moshe, do this. Excuse me?
Hashem is mentioned in the...
Yeah, sure.
But
not in the sense of Hashem telling Moshe, say this. You don't find that by the mitzvahs here in the book of Devarim like you have everywhere else. So there's a lot of, indications in different directions, So what do we do here? Says the Malbim. You ready? Here's the Malbim's way of answering up everything, explaining everything. All right, we got to start back to, and you have to remind me, we have to go back to the questions and make sure we answer them. Okay? So now, the first thing is, Eila Adonai Shadibra Moshe Kol Yisrael. Right, the first verse. These are the words Moshe spoke to the Jewish people in all these places. And we asked, you can't speak in all these places at the same time. Says the Malbim, that what this part of this pasuk is telling us, these are the words that Moshe spoke, means these are the words that Moshe spoke on his own. Meaning, the words you are about to hear in the book of Devarim, at least the section, right? I'll put it this way, the section that we spoke about, that is the section where Moshe rebukes the Jewish people for what they did wrong. These are the words that Moshe spoke to the Jewish people on the other side of the Jordan, which means now, and he also said them previously in the desert, in the plain, at the Red Sea, and all these places. As Rashi says, all these places are actually remuzim. They allude to different sins that the Jewish people committed. So, for instance, Di Zahav, the last 2 words in the first pasuk, Di Zahav. Zahav means gold, right? So we call this place Di Zahav. What sin do you think that is alluding to? Golden calf. So what's happening here is that, says the Malbim, when Moshe was with the Jewish people and they did something wrong, he rebuked them for it. Not because Hashem told him to, but because he's the leader of the Jewish people, he rebukes them. So even though when we read the story of the golden calf of the Torah, we don't know about any kind of rebuke that Moshe gave the Jewish people, like we're going to read here eventually in the book of Devarim, the rebuke for the sin of the spies. We're going to read that, but we don't have that previously, because previously it was Moshe on his own rebuking the Jewish people, as a leader does after the people stumble. So these are the words that Moshe spoke in all these places when the Jewish people sinned. He rebuked them. Now, let's go back. Let's go to verse 3, Pasuk Gimel. On the 40th year, the 11th month, on the first day of the month, Moshe spoke to the Jewish people all that Hashem commanded him to them. This pasuk, says the Malbim, is Hashem is saying to Moshe, those words that you said to the Jewish people previously, I want you to say them again right now to the Jewish people before they go into the land of Israel. Hashem takes Moshe's words of rebuke, and he now tells Moshe, those words that you said, you are to say them now to the Jewish people. And Hashem is going to use Moshe's words. As it says, Eila Devarim, these are the words of Moshe. Hashem is going to use Moshe's words, but now Hashem commands Moshe, you are commanded to say it to them. Now that and that's what it means. In the 40th year, Moshe in the 40th year, Moshe spoke to the Jewish people according to all that Hashem commanded him. Hashem now commanded him to say all these things he's going to say. All the previous rebuke that he said before, Hashem now wants him to say it again. But now he's saying it as commanded by Hashem. Now he's saying it the same way that Hashem told Moshe which words to write for the first 4 books of the Torah. This is what Hashem is telling Moshe to say to the Jewish people now. And it will be the 5th book of the Torah. But it's not Moshe's words on his own. This is not Moshe's a book of his sermons. This is the rebuke, so to speak, the sermons that he gave before. Now Hashem commands him to repeat them. Hashem takes Moshe's own words and makes them now part of the Torah. So therefore, therefore now we had a question: is the book of Devarim from Moshe or is the book of Devarim from Hashem? The answer is it's a little bit of both. A little bit of both. It is, you have originally these were Moshe's words on his own, but then Hashem said, they are now part of Torah. Repeat it now as I command you, and now will become part of Torah.
But means this 5th volume is not received in Mountain Sinai.
No, it was. It's like everything else, the mitzvahs, right? The mitzvahs were these words.
He mentioned after that.
Yes, or before, after, during. He said it before, but then it comes out. He said it before the Jewish people, but yes, they were not specifically said at Har Sinai. Correct, they were not. Again, how about the book of Bereshis? When Hashem told Moshe to write the book of Bereshis, when did he tell him to do that? Whenever he told him to do that. Okay, but you're right. According to the Malbim, this is not words that Hashem said that were said at Mount Sinai, but rather these were words that were said some before, some after. But now that Moshe is repeating them and Moshe is going to be writing them, as at the end of the Devarim it says Moshe wrote a Sefer Torah, Moshe is going to write them. Now they become part of the Torah. Okay, so now we got to go back to the questions we had before, right? The Talmud said that the Tochacha in Kisavo, Moshe said them. What does it mean Moshe said them? It means, okay, what does it mean according to this? Come to think of it now. Thought I understood it. Let's see. See, we don't have the problem now. We know that all comes from Hashem, right? So therefore, when the Gemara said before in Sanhedrin, every verse comes from Hashem, that's good. But now, what does it mean that the Tochacha in Kisavo was from Moshe? So I guess, I'm sorry, I didn't think about this now. See, it's all because of you, Arkady. I guess the explanation is that, again, since the style of the wording is Moshe talking, right? It is style in Vayikra, right? It's Hashem talking. Hashem says, if you go in my statutes. And actually before, the Torah says, these are I think it says over there, the ends of Bahar, these are the words of the covenant that Hashem said, that told Moshe to the Jewish people. But at the end of the day, it's in it's Hashem talking. If you go in my statutes, etc. And if you don't, I'll do this in this deal. Okay? And in Kisavai, when it comes to the Tochacha, how does it go there? Right. Again, in the Tochacha, it's Moshe speaking to the Jewish people. Meaning here, it's again, the style is Moshe talking. It is that these words Hashem told Moshe to say. These are words that Hashem told Moshe to say. But how are they being said? As if he's saying them. And therefore, that still makes a difference. It's not the same. The book of the Tochacha in Vayikra is Hashem talking, Mipi Hagvuras, from the mouth of Hashem. This is Hashem talking to them. While in Kisavai, do the words come from Hashem? Yes, the words do come from Hashem. But who's talking? Who's doing the talking? It's Moshe doing the talking. And basically what we have here is that the same way the book of Devarim starts off with Moshe repeating the rebuke that he said to the Jewish people before, the rest of the Torah, the rest of the book of Devarim continues that way. It continues that way as Moshe saying the mitzvahs. It continues that way with Moshe again when he gives him the rebuke. It's all still Moshe talking. But it's still Moshe talking the words that Hashem wants him to say. And even the words that Hashem gives him to say. These are the words that Hashem gives him to say. But again, Hashem gives him to say the words. The first part of Devarim are the words that he already said before. That Hashem now gives him to say those words again. And then there are other words that Hashem gives him to say, like the Tochacha. But it's still in that same kind of style where it is Moshe talking and not Hashem. And therefore, you have so that's the style of the book of Devarim, but the words all come from Hashem. So therefore, every part of the Torah comes from Hashem. What was the other question that there was? Right, we spoke about the style and the fact that in other places we have Hashem say, "Vaydaber Hashem al Moshe." Hashem said to Moshe, "Say this mitzvah." Here again, the style is Moshe is talking. But we have to remember also that, as we had at the beginning, as we mentioned before, the pasuk says, in the 40th year, Moshe spoke to the Jewish people all that Hashem commanded him to them. We said this was going on the words of rebuke, right? They may have been his wording, but Hashem told him to say it. Well, everything else that he said in the book of Devarim is the same thing. Hashem told him to say it. But it's him saying it. So therefore, you don't have this constant, Hashem said to Moshe, Hashem said to Moshe. That's when it's the narrative. That's when it's like a person telling over what happened. But here, where the book of Devarim is meant to be Moshe talking, and Hashem is telling Moshe to say, but it's Moshe talking, so then you don't have this, Hashem said to Moshe, Hashem said to Moshe. That was the introductory here at this part. And the rest of the book, the rest of the Sefer, works in that way. That it's coming across as his words, but it's his words, it's coming across as his words, but these are the words that Hashem told him to say. Have a wonderful evening.